Welcome back. This is our final video in this mini-series on sensitivity analysis and partial identification in linear regression models. Our previous video walked through in detail this brand new paper by Diegert, Masten, and Poirier. And in this video, I wanted to apply these tools to a prior publication of mine that looked at the benefits of participating in high school athletics on later life outcomes. And this is a perfect application of these tools because we can't run a randomized experiment where we make people be athletes and then follow them later on in life. And so the best data that we have to answer this question is observational. And so then the question is there actually a causal effect of being an athlete on other outcomes later in life? I'll show you the general setup of the paper, and then we'll go through a coding demonstration after that. This paper has a lot of sentimental value to me, in part because I got to work with my dad as a co-author, and also because it was the very first paper that I ever published in a peer-reviewed journal. So the title of the paper is, "Do High School Sports Build or Reveal Character? Bounding Causal Estimates of Sports Participation." So the general setup to our analysis is to look at the same empirical setting that we had done earlier in this video series, cross-sectional binary treatment variable. And here we're having the treatment variable be, did you participate on a varsity athletics team in high school? And then the outcomes are a wide variety. There's educational outcomes like, did you graduate high school? Did you attend college? Did you graduate college? There's also labor market outcomes like, how much are you earning? Are you employed full-time? And then there's also health and risky behavior outcomes. Are you overweight or obese? Do you exercise regularly? Are you a heavy drinker? So that's the general setup. And then what I wanted to replicate using the Diegert, Masten, and Poirier method is this table 4 in our paper, and in particular just this one regression here. So we've got men, we're looking at adult men, and we're looking at whether they graduated from high school as our Y variable, and then the treatment variable is, were they high school athletes? So if I have the short regression with no controls, that's going to tell me basically that there's a 16.3 percentage point premium to graduating high school for people who are athletes. And then if I include a battery of controls, that's going to go down to 6.2 percentage points. And so the question is, well, if I could also include all of the W's that are unobserved, would this coefficient eventually go to 0? And in this paper, we're using the Krauth approach, which is basically saying that our estimate's going to go to 0 if the unobservables are 27% as correlated as the observables are with treatment. So this is effectively saying that lambda h of 0.27 is going to correspond to alpha hat being 0. So let's go replicate this in the code now. And first I'll walk through the code, and then we can watch it run in Stata. So because I'm a clean coder, I've got a GitHub repository that has all of the replication files to that publication. And so we can easily just grab that URL, it's right here, and download that zip file, unzip it, load in the data, and then erase the zip file. And this is a clean coding way of importing the data straight from the replication repository. And then there's some data cleaning operations that need to be done. But then the main analysis is just right here. So I have my X's are this list of covariates, things like race and ethnicity, parent education, family income, score on the Armed Forces qualifying test, AFQT, I think is what that stands for, a non-cognitive test score called the Rotter score, and then maternal co-residence or maternal household headedness, and then birth cohort dummies. And then the key regression that we want to do is here. So the short regression is on line 169. That's just looking at the relationship between being an athlete and graduating high school, and then I can add the covariates for adjustment. And I'm restricting to 25-year-olds who are men. And then we also want to calibrate these row Ks the way that I showed you before. And so for that, I actually had Claude AI vibe code me a program that would easily do that. So I'll make this code available alongside this video. And so you can go through that if you want, but basically it's just implementing the code for that, but it ends up taking like 70 lines of code to do it. But I inspected it, and it seems like it's doing what it should be doing. And so I think it's going to be fine for the purposes of this illustration. So then once we do the short and the medium regression, then we can do this calibration to just get a sense for how correlated is treatment with each of the observables relative to the other observables. And then the Diegert et al. Paper has a Stata command called reg sensitivity that shows how to do these in Stata. So it's pretty straightforward. We just put in the same regression code that we had before. Here, order matters, and we need the treatment variable to directly follow the outcome variable. And then we can subset on the sample that we did in the other regression. And then we compare the same covariates because we don't really have any fixed effects or things that we don't want to include in the comparison. There's a note about that in the paper that we don't need to really concern ourselves with. And then we can try out different iterations of this. We can see what's the breakdown point. And then on line 178, it would be what's the breakdown point if I change the value of C bar. And then I can also do that by imposing that the R bar Y is the same as the R bar D. It's called RX bar here because that's what it's called in the paper. I can make the plot, and then I can look at the bounds. So there's reg sensitivity breakdown, there's reg sensitivity plot, there's reg sensitivity bounds, and then the syntax is pretty similar, and I just sort of apply whatever options that I want. So that is how that works. So let's see this in action in Stata. I've got my Stata here, and I'm in the right directory, so I'm just going to type do HS sports example, and then it will grab the data, do the cleaning, and then do all the analysis. And then because the Stata window is a little bit less friendly, I'm going to open up the log file in VS Code. So you can see this in real time as I'm letting it iterate. And then once it finishes, we can go through all the examples or go through the results. So that finished, and then let's look at the results now. So I've got the log file here, and basically we can just kind of scroll down to get to the main results. So I got that 16.3 percentage point premium in the short regression. I've replicated the 6.2 percentage point premium in the medium regression. And then the question is, how much do these things all correlate with my treatment? And what we have is that AFQT has the strongest correlation with treatment relative to all the other ones. And so if we look at these top three ones, these are ones that are potentially going to be undermining our selection on observables. So we should keep these numbers in mind when we're thinking about what the breakdown point ends up being. Then we can go down and see what the breakdown point actually is. So I'm getting a breakdown point of 25%. That's much smaller than basically the top 6 of these. And so the short of it is I'm going to conclude that this is not a robust finding because I have some of my observable selection ratios are bigger than my breakdown point, which is a ratio with unobservables in it. And then I can do some other iterations. So if I set RY bar equal to RX bar, that's going to be a little bit bigger. It's going to get it up to 57%. But I think that's still pretty low. And then we can get the plot. That's in a separate window. And then these are the bounds as I change my R bar D. So if I take it up to, if I take it up to 0.3, then I'm going to have a negative number included in that interval. And so that's going to be something that we need to think about. So we kind of take all these results and we put them together in our mind, and we come up with a logical argument, either defending or not defending criticism that our treatment is not actually real, that it's not causal. So I hope that that was helpful to illustrate some of these results. This is the end of this mini-series, but I really enjoy these tools because they make lucid the assumptions that we're making when we run regressions and want to do causal inference with the results. Thanks for joining me in this series, and I hope that you'll feel comfortable enough to start implementing these tools in your own research. I hope to see you around in other videos as well. Thanks.